We're getting into the toughest of weeks in the NFL, roster deadline week. Just how are the Broncos going to make those tough decisions, and what are the factors they're going to use as they whittle the roster down to 53 players? I'm going to get into that on this edition of Denver Football After Dark. Denver Football After Dark on this Tuesday morning. Hope it's a good morning, overnight, wherever you are, whenever you're watching this, because a lot of people watch this during the day. It's not just a nighttime show. By this time next week, we're going to be talking about players being cut. This is always the worst week of the year on the football calendar. And we were even talking about this, some of us in the media, in the press box on Saturday night, how there's always that practice during cut week before they've set the practice squad. And we've gotten used to watching the team with 90, 91 players. It's 91, of course, with the international exemption. And then before they've gotten the practice squad, we see only 53 guys, and it looks so empty. That's the rough part of it. But it's a cutthroat business. As we all know, as Adam Troutman put it, that's his words to describe it. And quite a few of the players who are on the roster right now aren't going to be there anymore in just a few short days. And it's not necessarily the best 53. I mean, it's sort of a cliche that football is the ultimate meritocracy, blah, 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 but it's not as simple as that. In fact, sort of the operative phrase that gets thrown around more is the right 53.
George and I, in fact, yesterday went through the next 10-day schedule. 12 days, 13 days, we're at the cut down. And then we're signing practice squad players. And so it's all part of the equation. And I would say every year is a little different. It's just a little different than like any year before. It's just a little different. It might be because of one guy who plays special teams. It's just every year is a little different. And I was taught at a young age the most significant thing is the right 53. And so that's what keeps you up at night, making sure, we're finding that group.
And the right 53 is balancing needs and tasks, because it's obviously getting the mix of players that can help you contend, but there's also development. I mean, it's not baseball where you've got a minor league system. The Rockies are beleaguered, although, hey, right now they're doing pretty well at the moment. They've won 6 of 7. They just beat the Dodgers on Monday night. But they've got a minor league system. You've got Charlie Condon, down there in Double-A, right? There's, what he's doing is probably just as important as maybe even more important than what's going on at the major league level, but he's down there at Double-A. He can get reps, but you've got to have your development guys there on your roster. And of course, there's the whole thing of, do you pass them through the practice squad, which means you have to expose them to waivers, or do you not want them to be exposed? Last year, for example, the Broncos did not want to expose Blake Watson or Frank Crum to waivers at the 53-player deadline. So they were on the 53. And you could certainly say that probably neither of them were among the best 53 at that moment. Now, in October, they did expose Blake Watson to waivers before the Saints game. But that was an interesting thing. They did it on a Thursday, and there was some strategy there. If you do that on a Thursday rather than on a Tuesday, and of course it was in advance of that Thursday night game in New Orleans, that's the point in the week when most teams are deep in their game planning. They've already got a practice or two under their belts, and so they're not really thinking about adding a player for the week. So the Broncos, by doing it then, figured they had the best chance of passing him through waivers for that day and then getting him successfully to the practice squad. And it worked out, and they did. I know they were very nervous about the possibility of somebody picking up Blake Watson on waivers that day, but it did not happen, and he passed through the practice squad. And then, of course, Watson would later that season get on the field, of course, against the Chargers again. So there are these things to consider. So on the 53, which players are going to be there who maybe aren't in the best 53 but are developmental? How many spots do you use? Where do you take risks? And that's why I did a little number crunching over the last 28 hours or so. And I wanted to start here and I went through the last 9 waiver cycles at the roster deadline. So this slide here, there's a lot of numbers. And I went through all the cuts and all the players put on waivers. Now, these are players that were waived, not released. So these are not vested veterans. Vested veterans are released, and thus they control where they go. And so that's why, for example, when the Broncos released Michael Burton last year and released Lil Jordan Humphrey, Sean Payton could tell them, look, I'm going to elevate you off the practice squad for 3 games, and then you're back on the 53. And they had control of that. They knew that those guys would return, and Sean Payton is very good at keeping his promises on that. They knew Payton would be true to his word, and he was, and they played out the season, and all was well. But with players on waivers, of course, it's a different story because any team can claim them, and then they have to go to that team. Period. That's it. So over the last 9 cycles, 2016 through 24, I went through and said, okay, which positions are most likely to be claimed? And it was interesting that it started with kicker. 9.3% of kickers that were cut or that were waived at the deadline were claimed. And then not far behind, 4th most likely to be claimed were long snappers. So, and then fullback was right there as the 3rd most likely. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. Fairly specialized roles are 3 of the 4 most likely positions to be claimed off waivers when passing through, when trying to be passed through. Kicker, fullback, long snapper. By the way, I think it's also very significant that the fullback the Broncos brought in over the weekend, Adam Prentice, to, at minimum, just get them through the week for a fullback in practice while Nate Adkins is injured and Michael Burton is dealing with a hamstring injury. I think it's very significant that Adam Prentice is a vested veteran. He has 4 seasons under his belt. So Adam Prentice could be released at the deadline, and then he would choose where he went. The Broncos could tell him, hey, you're going to be on the practice squad, but we're going to elevate you. And Sean Payton, who, of course, coached Adam Prentice in 2021 in New Orleans, he was with the Broncos in camp and then was waived, and then the Saints picked him up. Sean Payton can tell him, hey, this is our plan for you if we release you. So I think it's significant that the fullback the Broncos brought in over the weekend is someone that, if he's not on the 53 a week from now, when the roster deadline comes, that he would be released and not subject to the waiver process. So that's something to bear in mind. So anyway, fullback, long snapper, those are third and fourth. And then guard, tight end, punter, quarterback, right there in, somewhere in the middle third, right, at 5.99%. And then, I think fairly significantly for the Broncos, you look down among those bottom 6 positions in terms of positions claimed off waivers, in terms of percentage. Running back at 4.93%, so that's roughly 1 out of every 20 running backs waived at the deadline over the last 9 years is claimed by another team. Wide receiver, third from the bottom, 3.97. Tight end, second from the bottom, 3.55%. And certainly these, and maybe even some deeper numbers, are the types of things that Sean Payton and George Payton and their staff are going to be considering in terms of their discussions as to what to do as they whittle this roster down to the right 53.
So when we discuss these, we try to, how many players last year were claimed at quarterback? How many players were claimed as later round? We get these percentages to help us predict. We felt like Jaleel 2 years ago was going to be a practice squad player, and then in San Francisco, I think he has 120 some yards, and it's like, well, there goes the, so we discuss those risks, and it, for long hours, like, you're right on it. Like, we discuss that.
Long hours discussing that, going through these things, and certainly analytics and number crunching is a part of it. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is you have these numbers by position, which then translates to overall in that span, 5.38% of players waived in that time are going to be claimed. Okay. And actually, let's actually look at the last 3 years. And I'm going to get out the abacus here, and the abacus, as I call it. I'm actually going to go through just my Excel file here and just figure out something, because I've gone through the last 3 years of waiver claims, and how many of them of players waived the deadline, and how many of them were draft picks. Okay, so there were, if you'll give me a moment here, there were in the last 3 years 1,813 players waived at the roster deadline, not just not released, the vested veterans, but waived. And in that time, 79 of those players were claimed. Okay? So 79 of 1,813. So that's 4.36% of all players put on waivers that were claimed. Now, in that same span, there were 59 players that were waived in that span that were part of that year's draft class. Okay? And 9 of them were claimed. So overall, 4.36% of players in the last 3 years that were waived at the deadline were claimed. But if you were drafted in that year's draft and you were waived, you had a 15.3% chance of being claimed. So that's an interesting thing. The all-player sample size, 4.36% chance of being claimed in the last 3 years. If you were drafted, it's a 15.3% chance of being claimed. And that's significant if you talk about the decision you might be making on the guy right there in the graphic, in the slide there, and that, of course, is Caleb Lohner, the 7th-round rookie tight end out of Utah, who, of course, comes to the Broncos with limited experience, as we know. Very limited experience at the University of Utah, having played basketball at multiple schools before taking up football in 2024. Certainly raw and a project. And we saw on Saturday the manifestation of how raw he is with multiple penalties. It was a rough night for him, no doubt. And it was a reminder of just how far he has to go. At the same time, he was a player that was drafted. And we know that had he not been drafted, he was going to land somewhere. He was going to land with the Colts. And this is the whole thing that goes on at the end of the draft. But as the draft is going through the 7th round, the phone lines are already burning up in terms of making arrangements for players to land with teams. And then, of course, some of those arrangements go out the window if you're drafted. So Caleb Lohner, if he passes through the draft and he isn't taken, he's going to put a horseshoe on, and instead he puts a Bronco head on in terms of the helmet that he has. So does that come into play? Might the Colts bring him in? Now, that being said, they were talking about him as an undrafted guy, and certainly undrafted players are not necessarily ones that you would be thinking about for your 53-man roster in terms of that calculus. But that is something that may come into play, is that you are nearly 4 times as likely to be claimed in the last 3 years if you are a draft pick from that year's class than the general sample size of players who are waived. I mean, that something that comes into the Broncos thinking when they're pondering what to do. Certainly at the running back position, they're going to consider a lot of things. I mean, I put it there. There you see Blake Watson on the left, and you see Tyler Bidet on the right. And I mentioned earlier, 12th of 17 positions in terms of percentage of players that are claimed. 4.93% over the last 9 years. Now, an interesting thing, of those 17 players who have been claimed, not one of them had been waived at 3 previous cutdowns as Tyler Bidet has. I mean, that is the interesting thing on Bidet, that he has been exposed at 3 consecutive roster deadlines and has gone unclaimed at 3 consecutive roster deadlines. So I was looking at these 17 running backs over the last 9 years to see, okay, are there some patterns? Is it tilted, for example, toward rookies? Well, surprisingly not so much. Of these 17 running backs that were claimed, only 6 of them were rookies. So roughly a little over 1/3 of them were rookies. And then one more was 1 year removed from their draft class. And then you had, I'm going back through here, I'm on the Excel file, 6 of them were 2 years removed. And then 4 of them, like Tyler Bidet, were 3 years removed. And in fact, 2 of those 4 had relatively limited touches, like Bidet. Bidet does not yet have 20 career touches in the regular season and postseason combined. And in fact, those two guys, like Tyler Bidet, were day 3 draft picks. Bidet was drafted originally by, of course, the Baltimore Ravens, who waived him back in 2022 at the deadline. So these, you're making a decision based on what you expect, how you expect the market might react. You're kind of maybe also putting out some feelers and trying to take the temperature on things as well. But I mean, there are analytics for everything. And some of this is going back and you're trying to see what the history of the market is on how things work at the deadline. I think another thing that sort of is interesting is at the roster deadline, and I hope you watching this will take this the right way, but teams' fans tend to overvalue their players at the deadline. And I always say that teams' fans tend to overvalue and undervalue their players, but they rarely get the value exactly right. It's like the closer you are, the more almost like a little bit of myopia comes in. And sometimes you just kind of have to take a step back and get some distance. There are some front offices in sports that are guilty of this as well. I think your Colorado Rockies up at their 20th and Blake are probably a great example of a team that historically has some myopia with their own players in their system, and the reputation they have around baseball is that they tend to overvalue their players and their prospects. And that's why they tend to struggle to get deals done at times, is because of that overvaluing. But I think sometimes we tend to assume that, the players that are released by the Broncos are, going to be coveted, when the thing is, teams have guys that they like and they're hoping will pass through then they're players that they know. Most, like, take receivers, for example. And of course, to go back to that, to go back to the league-wide percentage here, wide receiver, third least likely to be claimed. And wide receiver is a position that seems to be developed fairly well at the college level. Thus, most teams tend to have a late round draft or undrafted receiver in their midst that they like. Thus, what tends to happen is, instead of claiming a receiver off waivers, teams tend to prefer to let the process of the way of the 24 hours play out, and then get the receivers back that they had in their camp on their practice squad. That's what they prefer to have happen, rather than pluck somebody for their room off of waivers. And so that's why you have at wide receiver certainly a low number. Literally 34 out of 856 over the last 9 years that have been claimed. So I don't mean to, come, both barrels on you guys, but that's just how it is. It's almost like wide receivers. I'm not saying they're dime a dozen, but just that almost every team has at least one young, like typically a rookie, undrafted or 7th round wide receiver that's flashing and that they like and that they want to keep around. So that means, hey, you're intrigued by Joaquin Davis. You're intrigued by Courtney Jackson. I mean, and this is a really good group of undrafted receivers the Broncos have in there. Jerwan Newton has flashed. Kyrese Rowan has flashed. Like, all of these guys have had moments. Courtney Jackson may well end up being the Broncos' number 2 returner, effectively, behind Marvin Mims Jr. But history says the chances of losing multiple of these rookie undrafted receivers are extraordinarily slim. The chances of even losing one aren't good. The chances of losing multiples of these undrafted receivers, if they're waived, is like, if it happened, it would be something that really was colossal. It would be a colossal outlier. And if it happened, you'd just be like, well, I mean, tough luck. You'd probably just have to say tough luck for us if it did. And then you'd basically rely on saying, well, maybe our scouts really just nailed it this time because, there were 5 guys, there were a slew of guys that we liked and we just couldn't keep them all. But anyway, so that's something to that's something to think about. This may sound crazy, but does Devon Vele make the 53? If Devon Vele is in any way borderline, you're trading him. He has, after the season that he had last year, he does have value. Now, that being said, given his age, which would come into the conversation here, that value may not be huge, but he still has 3 years of contractual control. And as a 7th rounder, and I've written about this, it was a rookie season that was the most productive for a 7th rounder since Marcus Colston back in 2006. That's how good it was. That type of season, and again, the glut of receivers probably means it's not going to get huge value. Is that worth a decent backup inside linebacker if you want to improve that area? Possibly. Is it worth, again, a solid, say, 3rd receiver, 2nd or 3rd receiver with 3 years of team control? Is that worth a 5th round pick? Perhaps. Again, cost control. We're not talking about an expensive player. We're talking about a 2nd or 3rd receiver who is on a cheap contract. So that matters as well. You'd be getting somebody who's proven they can be a decent starter at a very affordable price. So that means they'd have good value. So let's just say for a moment you could get a 5th round pick for him, and effectively you would have gotten a year of production and a 5th round pick for a 7th round pick. In the end, you kind of take that if that's something that was in play. Now, that being said, what could help you more at the moment, what could probably help you more at the moment would be maybe bolstering the depth at inside linebacker, especially since I think it's fair to have a little bit of nervousness about Dre Greenlaw since we're talking about a 2nd quad issue since April. And of course, the Achilles keeping him on the sideline for nearly all of last year. So I think it's fair to be in trust but verify mode on Dre Greenlaw right now. So if you could upgrade the depth at inside linebacker, it may be something you think about. And if you could do it for Devon Vele, is that something you think about because Pat Bryant looks like he is the real deal? And then that would then bring in the conversation the idea of one of those undrafted rookie receivers being your wide receiver 6 and then not having to worry about the idea of exposing them to waivers because these guys all have talent. Now, the one that you'd be talking about being the Frank Crum type as far as like you keep him on the 53 because of athletic measurables would be Joaquin Davis, who's raw. He's done some nice work blocking. Looked, he had a couple of nice moments on Saturday as well. So like he's the one, like if you said, okay, we're keeping a guy because of the attributes, it would be Joaquin Davis. If you're keeping somebody because of kind of what has flashed on the field in the preseason games, it would be Courtney Jackson. And certainly Courtney looks like a very gifted potential returner. Like Courtney may be someone like a little bit larger version of a Khalif Raymond, who of course is somebody y'all may remember being here little under a decade ago. And Khalif has forged a very nice career for himself as like a fourth receiver slash returner type. And, Broncos didn't end up keeping him around long term, and he's gone on to make a very good name for himself. So, anyway. Anyway, Denver football after dark here on this Tuesday morning. We're talking roster, talking all sorts of stuff here on this Tuesday morning. Talking about the Broncos country as a brotherhood and sisterhood or siblinghood, whatever we want to call it here on this. Caden Prieskorn versus Caleb Lohner. This could be an interesting thing as well. Just to clear it up, I know there's some talk on Crawshaw. He does not count on the off-season roster. He counts on the regular season roster. He count on the 53. If he were only on the practice squad in the regular season, he wouldn't count. But on the 53-player roster, he counts. So that's another thing. The exemption is only for the off-season, and then in-season only for the practice squad. On the 53, there's no exemption. Otherwise, if there were an exemption for the 53 for an international player, you know what would happen? You'd see 32 Australian punters in the NFL because everybody would want to use their exemption on a punter. And they would use it on Australian because there are enough of those guys coming from out of Pro Kick Australia to where teams would just kind of give the Aussies the benefit of the doubt, and they would use that roster exemption just to have the extra spot. It would mean that much. So that'd be funny. The SPV was way louder than normal volume. Yep. Oh yeah. Well, that's one of those things I don't have a lot of control over. So because that's coming through a mult box. So anyway, sorry about that. Appreciate that, Derek. Thank you very much. Do you think Truss can push Crum off the roster or even the practice squad? Maybe. I think Frank Crum, he is at least on the practice squad. If they waive him, I think they still keep him on the practice squad because they still want to keep developing him and keep seeing where he goes. But I do wonder if they've decided if with him they do go ahead and try to expose him to waivers this time around, because now we are 1 year removed from his draft class. It's a little bit different situation. I mean, I think the same thing comes up with Blake Watson as well at running back. Now that we're 1 year removed, do you expose him? Now, that being said, Blake's put some good film out there in the preseason. I put him on my 53. You can read that at denversports.com. I actually had Bidet off the 53 and the Broncos trying to pass him through waivers and Blake Watson on. Part of it was just younger, thinking that maybe there's a little bit greater chance of him being plucked. I do think Sean Payton and the Broncos like Blake Watson's skill set. The pass-catching aspect of that does sort of feed into the Joker potential. And Jokers, we know how Sean Payton likes that skill set, and it's hard to find. Blake Watson's the most natural pass catcher in that room. And I don't think they want to let that out of the room. And ultimately, I think that's why if I had to guess, it's just a guess. We're just trying to read tea leaves at this point. I think that's why Blake Watson may snag a spot on the 53 when they're making the cuts at the end of it. That one sports guy. My favorite part of training camp is Troy Franklin made it hard on the coaches to order the receiver. It looks like they got depth. Yeah. And it's not just depth. I love the idea of packages that have Franklin and Mims on the field at the same time and having that sort of speed out there. It's kind of pick your poison mode, and you can do that. And with Franklin, because he's improving as a blocker, and then I did love what he did on the Engram play, because if he's not careful, he could get called for a crackback, and he really kind of deftly moves his body to avoid that. And that's an incredibly heady play on his part. I mean, there's so much smart football going on the Evan Engram 58-yard catch and run, because you've got Franklin where if he's not careful, he's going to get called for a penalty, and he avoids that. And then, of course, downfield, you got Pat Bryant sticking with it and then getting the huge block down the sideline, man. I mean, that's how can you not love all aspects of that play? It's smart football. It's incredible. Is Bryant taking Vele's spot? I mean, quite possibly. And it's interesting. Last year, one of the reasons why Vele made it and Tim Patrick didn't, you were asking the question, if Devon Vele got Tim Patrick's reps, would Vele be as productive as Tim Patrick by the end of the season? And the answer, you guessed the answer would be yes. And then you looked at Vele's production by the end of the season, and that was correct. Turned out Vele actually could, for the most part, replicate what you'd probably get out of Timmy Patrick, at least the Timmy Patrick that had missed 2 full seasons with an Achilles and an ACL. So that proved to be correct. So you may ask yourself the same question here, even though Vele's only a second-year guy, and presumably Vele, still would improve, but you may have to ask yourself that if Pat Bryant plays gets the reps that you would give to Vele, which one of those players is better at the end of the year if you give them those reps? Who do you project is better? Who's got more upside? I mean, this is something, and these are the types of discussions that the Broncos are going to have internally when they're comparing players, and in terms of how they're going to divvy up playing time. You're making these sorts of comparisons, and it's tough. It's really tough. That's like Sean Payton says, they're rooting for all these guys to succeed. I mean, that's why this week sucks. You like these guys personally. I mean, you like Devon Vele. I mean, Vele is a great story, and it's not like Vele has done anything to lose playing time. He's had a good, he hasn't had as dynamic a camp as, say, Pat Bryant, but he came up. He came up nicely in the first preseason game. He's done well in the joint practices. He's been dealing with a little bit of an injury, but he's been fighting through it. That's sort of the same. It's sort of the same thing on the defensive line. We talk about the Eni Iwazurike, Jordan Jackson thing, and if they're battling for one spot on my 53, I found room for both. I said, okay, I'm going to go heavy with 17 linemen. Jordan Jackson's done nothing over the course of training camp to lose that spot, but Eni Iwazurike might have nudged him out. And then, by the way, Savion Jones, I'm watching him on Saturday, and he's pushing through a double team there at one point. It's like, okay, man, he's come to play too. You have these good problems that are developing because you have a young guy coming in who might be better, and yet the incumbent isn't going down easy. So It's fun. It's fun. What do you think of Courtney Jackson? I thought, yeah, good job. I thought he did, yeah, good, great, whatever you want to call it. He's so natural as a returner, and he's got not only got the vision, he's got the ability to apply it. When I watched his Arkansas State footage, like the thing that impressed me was how his vision translated to very smooth moves in terms of how he could navigate his way through traffic. That's something that's unusual. He's got a little bit of a preternatural ability to navigate through what can be chaotic situations. And that's a skill that's going to keep him in the league. I mean, I don't know that he'll be someone who is ever going to be a 40 or 50 catch guy playing regularly on offense, but I think as a return specialist, he's got a very bright future. And there's always going to be room for a player who can do that in the league. So I think Courtney Jackson's got an NFL future. It's a question of whether there's room on the Broncos roster for him to have that future here, or if it's going to be somewhere else. Like if they waive him and somebody else claims him. That's the question. And that's the thing with these undrafted rookies. I look at all of these undrafted rookie receivers and the flashes I've seen from all of them. I think every one of these guys will catch a regular season pass in the NFL. So they'll all end up with pages on Pro Football Reference with stats before they're done. And it's rare that if you've got like 4 or 5 undrafted rookies in a camp at wide receiver, it's rare that you can say that. And the other thing is I don't even mention Michael Bandy because he's just been around year after year. And that dude just makes plays. Just goes out there and makes plays. I mean, he doesn't really have a chance at the 53. And I think now the question is he still on the practice squad or not? Because Bandy in the practice squad fills a very important role in that he can play the slot receiver on a scout team exceptionally well. But the thing is, if you waive Jerwan Newton and he passes through, Jerwan Newton has the ability to do that as well, and he has upside as a rookie. So with Bandy being someone who's a few years down the line, you know kind of what he is, do you go with the rookie who can give you the scout team reps? Because part of a practice squad is you need players on a practice squad that help you put together a scout team for practice. There is a practice function to the practice squad. It's not just about the best players you're trying to develop. It's about having guys that help you conduct a practice in the regular season. So Michael Bandy has a very specific role that helps in practice. But if you have a rookie who has some untapped upside that you want to see where it goes, and he can fill that role in practice, do you prefer that over somebody where you kind of know what he is? So that's something to consider. I mean, I'm not saying these are relatively important questions in terms of determining whether the Broncos are going to be able to knock the Kansas City Chiefs off in the AFC West. They're important questions to these players. There's a story that I heard that I once heard. It's a John Feinstein story, the late John Feinstein, the author who passed away this year. And I remember hearing about this, and I think you can even read this somewhere online. And I believe he's at the winter meetings in baseball one year, and he was expecting like a trade to go down, and he bumps into, and he was looking for Jeff Torborg, then the Mets manager, and he asked, like, so did the big deal go down? It turned out there was a trade, but it was a relatively minor deal. But Torborg told him, well, to those guys, it is the big deal. And it's just something to always kind of bear in mind that we may, you know, I know that talking about the practice squad impact of, what could happen to Michael Bandy and Jerwan Newton. I mean, these are not, maybe we're not talking about something that's going to affect whether the Broncos are our playoff team or not, but these are to them what happens whether they're on the practice squad or not. These are big things to them. Like, it's important to them. So something that maybe is relatively minor in terms of the Broncos and where they finish, these are still things that mean the world to these guys. And what happens on next Monday and Tuesday. I mean, you're talking, some of these things are like life changing. And so always also, this is also why I think about these things. And, I always say when we talk about these things, let's always try to be sensitive about them, because, lives are going to change next Monday and Tuesday. I mean, some of these things are life altering events. I mean, I think back to last year when Jarrett Stidham lost the battle for the job with Bo Nix. And there was some criticism of how he answered questions after the preseason finale. And I thought that criticism was out of bounds, because he was answering questions basically just days after he'd lost a battle for a starting job, a moment that basically was like a fork in the road for his career and kind of his life. I mean, if he wins that starting job, I mean, his career might go in an entirely different direction. I mean, and that's a life-changing moment. Instead, he loses that, and at that point, his career in life kind of starts in another direction, the career backup direction, potentially, right? I mean, in all likelihood. I mean, he's having a heck of a camp this summer, but think to the contract that he signed in March. He quickly just decided to sign a 2-year deal to be a backup. It wasn't a consideration to go to a place where, he might get a chance to start some games because the starter is injured, like Zach Wilson did. It was kind of accepting that he's the understudy. That's the result of the life-changing thing that happened, which was losing the battle for the starting job. Anyway. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So, a lot of things talk about running backs, Bidet over Estime. Don't think Bidet or Watson will pass waivers. I mean, this is a lot of belief that Bidet will be picked up, and we'll see. Then again, I'll just throw the numbers back up here. Running backs, 4.93% chance of being claimed off waivers. Running 12th out of 17 positions. And then the other stat that I threw out there is that in the last 9 years, no running back who has been waived 3 times at the deadline and then got waived again got claimed. So just bear that in mind. If Bidet gets claimed, it goes against history. If Bidet gets claimed, it's an outlier. And sometimes you get burned by the outlier, but that's sort of the way things go. You don't. I often say that, and teams kind of tend to function this way. They don't bet on the outlier. And in this case, you're hoping the outlier doesn't come to pass if you waive Bidet. If they do waive Bidet, they would do so knowing that the odds would be in their favor of getting him back. And if they don't, they might kick themselves, but they'd kick themselves knowing that, well, we took a chance, we played the percentages and lost. Sort of like, you remember the game show Card Sharks? And, if you got to the point like you had a queen and you said, I'm going to go lower, and it was a king. Okay? I mean, at some point, like you're like, oh man, that stinks. But I mean, you played the percentages, right? You made the call that anybody would have made there to say lower. I'll go, to the host was it Jim Perry, and then was Bob Eubanks. Like, hey, I'll go lower, Jim. And the whole audience would be yelling, "Oh, lower, lower, lower!" I'll go lower, Jim. It was a king. Sorry, but you did what anybody would have done with that card at that moment, and oh, sorry, king. Go back to the beginning. So, if you lost out, you would at least you do so not saying like, well, we played it. We played the 20 to we played the 20-1 thing, and it was in our favor, and this was the one out of 20 that came up against us. So, anyway, that's my take on it. So, anyway, you would pick lower. Anyway, I could be wrong, but I guess here's that's why I asked Sean a few weeks ago about like the whole thing of when you look back on it, do you regret what do you regret more? Do you regret if you didn't trust your gut or you didn't trust the analytics? And you could tell that like it was something I'm not sure he'd really thought about that, because it was sometimes when he answers a question, you can tell he's in the middle of rough draft thoughts and he's thinking about it, because like his answer is the thought process. He's working it out, and he's working it out as he's speaking. And that's actually the questions I like to ask the most are when I want to get him thinking, and I want to get that thought process right there. Like I want to get the gears turning in his head. I want to get the gears turning in anybody's head. Honestly, that's like my favorite thing to do in an interview is get somebody thinking get somebody really thinking, and even like catch them off guard a little bit. To me, that's fun. So, all right. Always go with your guts. But that's the thing. Like, I guess to me, I regret more not if I don't go. I guess it's the black. I'm not a gambler, but I learned blackjack at a very young age, because one of the games that we had for the Atari 2600. I'm dating myself here. So we had an Atari 2600 at home. So I literally was playing video games like as long as I could remember. So I'm playing, if you can imagine, little Mace, 5 years old, with his Atari 2600 playing blackjack. This is completely true. And I think that's one of the when I figured out the rules of blackjack, which I did pretty quickly on it, I think it's probably what started getting me into kind of numbers and odds, I guess. I suppose it was sort of the beginning of the whole thing, because with blackjack, it's so kind of rigid. And the whole key to blackjack is being over time, being consistent in your decision making, right? Like, and not deviating from it. Just making sure that like not getting caught in your gut feeling. Like just and if you're consistent in your decision making, you're going to feel better in the end about it. And so that to me is like why, like I'm going to like, okay, I'm going to make this decision. I'm going to make this decision with this set of circumstances every time. That's why, like, if I if I would probably like if I were offensive coordinator or coach of a team, I would have everything set out specifically as to when I was going to go for two. I have all the scenarios mapped out, and I would stick with that, and I would never deviate from it. Every possible scenario, scoreboard wise, about when to go for two, and I would never and I would never change from that. Whatever came up in front of me, okay, like okay, all right, here we are. We're, up 12 at this point in the game. Boom, you know, and I would go for two much more often than most. I mean, there's actually a school of thought that you should go for two every time, and that you're going to end up with more points in the end. It was actually my hypothesis on Tim Tebow that he might have been worth a roster spot to go for two every time. That if he could take your 2-point conversion percentage up because of the style of quarterback he was, and because he could also plow through people and bring that threat, that, and I was thinking this like in 2011 when it was apparent that he wasn't going to be a viable long-term quarterback because he just couldn't be accurate, but he could, in 2-point conversions, he was very good because of the dual threat nature and because he could actually run through, because he had the power running ability to him. So one of the things that kind of went through my mind was, okay, if he could get your 2-point conversion percentage up to, say, 70, and you went for two every time, how many more points would that give you over the course of a year? And would that be worth the roster spot? So I sat down and one day and went through an Excel file, and I just blah, 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 blah. And I figured out that it would actually be worth the rosters. It would be worth the roster spot for him to do that and only that and nothing else. So anyway, that was my weird thing. So Sean chose both through his analytics. In part, yes, although as I've gone through some of those analytics and realize that those analytics also favored Paxton Lynch as well, I'm not sure how foolproof they are. They're not everything. So, but the other interesting thing about that was he even admitted they weren't everything, because like he talked about like how he ran Caleb Williams and Drake May through them, and yeah, but they were kind of out of their reach. Like, which I think also sort of told you that if they had a top 3 pick, almost like with all respect to Bo Nix, if they had a top 3 pick, they would have taken one of those top 3 quarterbacks, which I think is also sort of, it sort of comes back to the whole thing of they knew they weren't going to get one of those big 3 at the top. So it was, okay, we have to pivot to the quarterbacks that we can realistically get. Which one of Michael Penix, J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix? Like, if we assume that these 3 are impossible, which of the 3 possibles fits the best? And it was Bo. So that was something, I think that it's sort of like at running back this year. Ashton Genty, I mean, would have been tremendous potentially for the Broncos. But became quickly apparent that getting up to draft him would have required way too much in capital, would have been too rich for the Broncos' blood, especially coming out of a few years where they sacrificed so much in draft capital. And as you've got some of these pricey contracts coming in, they're going to get to a point where they're going to need their draft capital in order to fill holes on the roster as some of these bigger contracts come in, and maybe they're going to have to make some choices at some point, and especially down the line when if Bo Nix develops well and earns that second contract, then you really have to fill holes through the draft. So it was probably the right call. So anyway, would Sean have selected Michael Penix if he was available? No, they were basically of the three in the next flight. They were on Bo. Like once they knew, okay, Daniels is out, Caleb's out, Drake May is out. It was okay. Which of these three fits us best? And it was Bo. That's the thing. Congrats on the new show. It's not something fresh takes guts and vision. You got both. Every great career began with that first episode and built from there. Thanks. Stay consistent. I appreciate that, Don. I mean, I've said it a few times, this is kind of a test kitchen, so it's just figuring things out and learning how to do a show by myself, do it more often. I can tell you this. I had to do Orange and Blue today by myself on Monday because Cecil was on assignment, as we say, so he was unavailable for the Monday show. I felt so much better and at ease doing that show on my own because of this. And honestly, before doing that show on my own would have sort of, given me some nervousness. I would have been like, oh crap, here we go. Doing that show on my own on Monday, it was smooth. The only thing was it took me a little longer to get a couple of the elements ready, cutting the video than I wanted to. So it just took a little more time, but it didn't faze me at all. So that's actually the thing. Alex would say a left-handed quarterback that ain't got good chances of being elite. Well, it's also a much smaller sample size of left-handed quarterbacks. And hey, there's been Steve Young, there's been Boomer Esiason. It's not like there haven't been left-handed quarterbacks. So anyway, R.J. Harvey is the Broncos Genty. We'll see about that. Well, we're fixing to find out, as they say. So, all right, it's a Broncos practice day today. They're going to be on the field at 10:30, and the reporting will be a little bit different. I know y'all have been used to seeing the real-time reports on social media. Now that it's not open to the public in the same way, it'll be quieter during practice. Look to see things popping up from immediately after practice. I will still have reports after the session, so look for that on my social media. And, of course, on this YouTube channel as well. And Cecil Lamb and I will break it all down on Orange and Blue today at 5 p.m. Mountain Time on the Denver Sports social channels and, of course, on the Denver Sports YouTube channel. By the way, thank you for all of you who subscribed to that. We recently went over 20,000, and in terms of subscribers, that was kind of a big deal for us. It was something we'd been shooting for. So that actually helps algorithmically for us on that. So that's something for which we're grateful for all the people and all of you for supporting us on that. And I can't thank you enough for the kind words and support for me on here as well. It's really helped me kind of get this thing going. It's bolstered my confidence in doing solo shows. And I've got some ideas that are percolating here that once we get through kind of the training camp phase, part of it is when I'm out there for training camp and watching practice for 2.5 hours, that chews up a good portion of my day. When we get past that and we're not watching practice for as long and I'm only watching about 30 minutes of practice, there's a part of my day that opens up. And that's when I'm going to probably start producing some different types of packages that I've wanted to get into, maybe like some 8 to 10 minute packages that I'm going to start throwing on here as well. This is something I wanted to experiment with, that maybe I'll run different parts of the day attacking like some specific subjects and all that, and that are going to be more pre-scripted. So that's something I'm really looking forward to doing on here. So I can't wait to do that. Oh man. The watchable without the background music. Oh boy. Yeah, that was funny. The background music, which goes off after a couple of minutes. But someone had that on there in the comment, and I'm just like, and they wanted me to turn it off sooner, and I'm like, that doesn't really fit, because this is sort of a slow language show at times, and I want to have I want to kind of ease into it, so keeps me awake for my overnight shifts. See, it's not not a huge audience, but I knew there was going to be an audience somewhere out there that would dig a show at this crazy hour. I knew it. It was just, I don't know why. I just knew somehow there would be people who actually wanted a show at at a ridiculous hour. Now, I anticipate it's going to be less ridiculous once we're past camp. I do think that this will probably, as we get into the season, probably settle to like a 10 or 10:30 p.m. show. But and that's Mountain Time. So those of you in the Eastern Time Zone, this is still going to probably be after midnight. But so anyway, so it's I knew that people would want to. I knew that there would be people out there who actually would dig a show that was in the wee small hours of the morning. So anyway, Denver football after dark here, wrapping this up on a Tuesday morning. I appreciate all of you joining me, and also appreciate you, Derek, for the super chat. I know we got your question in, so thank you for that little bit of support as well. It means an awful lot to have all of you riding with me on this show, and whether you're watching live or watching on delay, doesn't matter. When you watch, I just appreciate that you are joining me on this. So thanks from the bottom of my heart for being with me on this journey, and I'll be back again Tuesday night and Wednesday morning talking about the Broncos after their Tuesday practice as they begin preparing for the final preseason game, the one in New Orleans, where we will see their starters for just a little bit there in the Superdome there in downtown New Orleans. So big week, last week of the preseason. The days counting down to the regular season are getting down to a few. It's going to be exciting here in the next couple of weeks. So appreciate you rolling with me. So take care. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Getting a few more subscribers here. I noticed there's always more subscribers kicking in with each video. So really appreciate all of you riding with me on this channel as well as over at Denver Sports on that channel. So thanks a lot. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care.